October 15th, 1944, 800 meters above sea level in the dense forests of the Ardennes region. The morning mist clung to the ancient oaks like ghostly fingers, and Hauptmann Klaus Müller of the German Army's 2nd Panzer Division stood confidently at the edge of a small clearing, his field glasses sweeping the tree line one final time. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of damp leaves and distant smoke from cooking fires, and Müller believed with absolute certainty that his sector was completely secure. He had no idea that just 300 meters away, concealed behind a fallen log and perfectly camouflaged with local vegetation, Staff Sergeant David Thompson of the United States Army's 28th Infantry Division had been watching him through a scope for the better part of 2 hours. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What neither man understood in that crystalline moment was that their encounter would challenge everything they believed about duty, humanity, and the true cost of the conflict that had already consumed so much of Europe. Müller lowered his field glasses and turned to address the young soldier standing nervously beside him, Gefreiter Hans Weber, barely 19 years old, and still wearing the eager expression of someone who had volunteered for service just 6 months earlier. The forest around them seemed peaceful, almost serene, with only the occasional call of a crow breaking the morning silence. "Sector clear, Weber," Müller announced with the confidence of an officer who had served on 3 different fronts over the past 4 years. "Send word back to battalion that the reconnaissance is complete. No American forces detected in grid squares 7 through 12. Thompson, hidden in his carefully prepared position, adjusted his rifle slightly and continued his observation. He had been tracking this particular German patrol since dawn, part of a broader intelligence-gathering mission that had brought his squad deep behind enemy lines. The Springfield rifle in his hands was loaded and ready, and according to every manual, every briefing, and every order he had received, the enemy officer standing in that clearing represented a legitimate target of opportunity. But Thompson found himself hesitating, and the reason had nothing to do with military protocol or tactical considerations. Through his scope, he could see Müller's face clearly, and something about the man's expression reminded him powerfully of his own older brother, Michael, who had been teaching high school mathematics in Milwaukee when the war began. There was an intelligence in Müller's eyes, a thoughtfulness that suggested depth beyond the simple caricature of the enemy that Thompson had carried in his mind for so many months. Müller began walking slowly through the clearing, his boots crunching softly on the carpet of fallen leaves. He paused occasionally to examine tracks in the soft earth, reading the forest floor like a book written in mud and broken twigs. His movements were methodical, professional, but there was something else in his demeanor that Thompson found increasingly difficult to ignore. The German officer seemed tired, not physically but spiritually, as if the weight of the ongoing conflict had settled into his bones like a chronic ache. "Sir," Weber called softly, "should we proceed to checkpoint 7 as ordered?" Müller nodded, but his response carried a note of reluctance that Thompson could hear even from his concealed position. "Yes, but maintain spacing. These forests have seen enough. Enough unnecessary events. We complete our reconnaissance and report back. Nothing more." Thompson felt his finger lighten its pressure on the trigger. Something in Müller's tone, the way he had paused before saying unnecessary events, suggested a man who had seen too much and was growing weary of the endless cycle of advance and retreat, observation and engagement that defined their daily existence. Through his scope, Thompson watched as Müller knelt down beside a small stream that cut through the clearing, cupping the clear water in his hands and drinking deeply. The American sniper had been trained for exactly this scenario. The target was isolated, clearly visible and completely unaware of his presence. The range was well within his capabilities, and the tactical value of removing an experienced German officer from the field was unquestionable. Yet as he watched Müller stand up from the stream, wiping his hands on his field uniform, Thompson found himself thinking about a conversation he had with his squad leader just 3 days earlier. Sergeant First Class Robert Jackson, a career soldier from Georgia who had served in the Pacific before being transferred to the European theater, had been cleaning his rifle when he looked up at Thompson with an expression of unexpected somberness. "You know what gets to me most about this whole business, Thompson?" Jackson had asked. It's not the danger or the cold or even missing home. It's the moments when you realize that the fellow in the other uniform probably has a family waiting for him too. Probably worries about the same things you do. Now, watching Mellor through his scope, Thompson understood exactly what Jackson had meant. The German officer reached into his breast pocket and withdrew what appeared to be a photograph, studying it for a long moment before carefully tucking it away again. The gesture was so universal, so recognizably human, that Thompson felt something shift inside his chest, like a physical weight settling in a new position. Weber approached Müller cautiously, his young face showing the nervousness that comes with being in enemy territory. "Hauptmann, do you think the Americans are nearby? The local farmers yesterday spoke of strange sounds in the night, movement that didn't match our patrol schedules." Müller considered this information carefully, his trained eye sweeping the forest perimeter one more time. He had survived 4 years of conflict by paying attention to details, by trusting his instincts, and by never underestimating his opponents. The American forces had proven themselves to be resourceful, well-equipped, and increasingly skilled at forest warfare. Their sniper teams in particular had earned a reputation for patience and precision that even veteran German officers respected. "The Americans are certainly in this region, Weber," Müller replied thoughtfully. "Their reconnaissance capabilities have improved dramatically since Normandy. They move through these forests like ghosts, gathering intelligence, disrupting supply lines, and then melting away before we can respond effectively. We must always assume we are being observed." Thompson felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October morning air. Müller was describing his exact mission, his exact methods, with an accuracy that suggested genuine tactical understanding rather than paranoid speculation. The German officer clearly understood the nature of the threat he faced, yet he continued to move through his sector, with the calm professionalism that Thompson had come to associate with experienced soldiers on both sides of the conflict. As Müller continued his patrol, Thompson found himself studying the man's equipment and bearing with the analytical eye that had been trained into him through months of combat experience. The German officer's uniform was well maintained, but showed signs of hard use with careful patches and repairs that spoke of supply shortages and the practical necessities of extended field service. His sidearm was a standard-issue Luger, worn in a holster that had been polished smooth by constant use. But it was Müller's manner of moving through the forest that impressed Thompson most. The German moved with the quiet confidence of someone who understood terrain, who could read the land and use it effectively. Weber, meanwhile, provided an interesting contrast to his commanding officer. The young soldier's equipment was newer, his movements less assured, and his frequent glances at the surrounding tree line betrayed the nervous energy of someone still learning to manage fear in hostile territory. Thompson recognized the type immediately. He had been exactly like Weber just 18 months earlier, when his own unit had first landed in North Africa, and he had struggled to adapt to the reality of combat operations. "Sir," Weber said quietly, "may I ask you something about the tactical situation?" Müller gestured for him to continue, while keeping his own attention focused on a section of the forest where the undergrowth seemed particularly dense. "Of course, Weber. Questions are how soldiers learn to stay alive." The briefing suggested that American sniper teams operate in pairs, with one spotter and one shooter. "If there are Americans in this area, shouldn't we be more concerned about observation posts in the high ground?" Thompson almost smiled, despite himself. Weber was asking exactly the right questions, demonstrating the kind of tactical thinking that would serve him well if he survived long enough to develop real experience. The young German soldier was correct about American sniper doctrine. Thompson's spotter, Corporal Jimmy Martinez from New Mexico, was positioned approximately 50 meters to his left, with field glasses and a backup rifle. Müller nodded approvingly at Weber's question. "Excellent observation. Yes, American sniper teams typically work with spotters, and they favor elevated positions when possible. However, in terrain like this where the canopy is thick and the undergrowth provides excellent concealment, they might choose to operate from ground level. A skilled sniper can remain invisible just a few hundred meters away, particularly if he has time to prepare his position properly." The accuracy of Müller's analysis was unsettling. Thompson realized that he was facing an opponent who understood his methods, his capabilities, and his limitations with remarkable precision. This was not the stereotypical enemy officer of propaganda posters, but a professional soldier who had clearly studied American tactics and adapted his own methods accordingly. Martinez's voice crackled softly in Thompson's earpiece, transmitted through the new portable radio equipment that had only recently become available to forward reconnaissance teams. "Thompson, you've had a clean shot for over an hour. What's your status?" Thompson keyed his microphone twice in response, the agreed-upon signal for target-acquired continuing observation. He could not explain, even to himself, why he continued to watch Müller rather than completing his mission. The German officer represented legitimate military value as a target, and every minute of delay potentially compromised the intelligence-gathering operation that had brought them so deep behind enemy lines. Müller was now examining what appeared to be a map case, comparing written notes with the terrain features visible around the clearing. Weber stood nearby, maintaining a proper security watch while his commanding officer worked. The scene had an almost peaceful quality that seemed completely at odds with the violent reality of their situation. "Weber, look at this," Müller said, pointing to a section of his map. "According to our intelligence reports, there should be evidence of recent American movement through this grid square. Vehicle tracks, equipment caches, perhaps even temporary campsites. But I see none of these indicators. Either our intelligence is incorrect, or the Americans are far more skilled at concealment than we have been led to believe." Thompson found himself nodding in grudging agreement. Müller's assessment was completely accurate. Thompson's own unit had passed through this area just 2 weeks earlier, but they had followed strict protocols for concealing their movement. Every vehicle track had been carefully brushed out, every temporary position had been restored to its natural state, and any equipment caches had been buried so deeply that only metal detectors would reveal their presence. The German officer's next action surprised Thompson completely. Müller walked to the center of the clearing and stood motionless for several minutes, his head tilted slightly, as if listening to sounds that only he could hear. His posture suggested concentration rather than anxiety, as if he were trying to read some message written in the morning breeze itself. "Sir," Weber asked quietly, "what do you hear?" "Nothing, Weber, and that concerns me more than any sound might. These forests are normally alive with bird calls, small animals moving through the underbrush, the natural symphony of a healthy woodland ecosystem. But this morning, everything is too quiet. When wildlife falls silent, it usually means that something has disturbed the natural balance." Thompson felt his heart rate increase as he realized the implication of Müller's observation. The German officer was absolutely correct. The presence of concealed soldiers did tend to quiet the normal sounds of forest life. Animals could sense human presence even when humans could not detect each other, and their altered behavior often provided the first indication that hostile forces were nearby. Müller began walking in a slow circle around the clearing, his attention focused on details that would be invisible to less experienced observers. He paused occasionally to examine broken twigs, disturbed earth, or the pattern of fallen leaves, reading each sign like letters in an alphabet that most people never learned to recognize. "Sir," Weber said with obvious nervousness, "should we perhaps complete our reconnaissance more quickly and return to battalion?" Müller stopped his examination and looked directly at his young companion. "Weber, fear is a natural response to danger, and a soldier who claims never to feel fear is either a liar or a fool. But fear becomes dangerous only when it prevents us from thinking clearly or acting professionally. We will complete our mission according to our orders, but we will do so with appropriate caution." Thompson found himself impressed by Müller's leadership style. The German officer was clearly aware of the potential danger, but he was managing his subordinates' anxiety while continuing to gather the intelligence that his superiors required. It was exactly the kind of steady, professional approach that Thompson had learned to respect in his own unit's leadership. Martinez's voice returned to Thompson's earpiece, carrying a note of increasing urgency. "Thompson, we've got movement on the ridgeline about 800 meters north. Looks like a German patrol, maybe squad strength. We need to wrap this up and relocate." Thompson keyed his microphone 3 times, the signal for "understood," proceeding with mission. But even as he prepared to complete his assignment, he found himself hoping that some distraction would present itself, some development that would allow him to complete his intelligence gathering without having to make the irreversible decision that his training demanded. Muller had now completed his circuit of the clearing and was standing near the small stream, studying something in the soft mud at the water's edge. His expression showed the focused concentration of someone who had discovered evidence that confirmed his suspicions. "Weber, come here and look at this," Muller said, pointing to what appeared to be a barely visible indentation in the mud. "This is a boot print, and it was made by someone wearing American-manufactured footwear. The tread pattern is completely different from anything in our supply system." Weber knelt down beside his commander, studying the faint impression with obvious interest. "How old do you estimate it to be, sir?" "Based on the degree of erosion and the amount of sediment that has settled into the depression, I would say no more than 48 hours. Possibly much more recent than that." Muller straightened up and looked directly toward the section of forest where Thompson lay concealed, which means that American reconnaissance teams have been operating in this immediate area very recently. Thompson felt ice water in his veins as Muller's gaze seemed to pass directly over his position. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. The German officer appeared to be looking straight at him, and Thompson was certain that his concealment had been compromised. But after several seconds, Muller's attention moved on to other sections of the tree line, and Thompson realized that the German had not actually spotted him. "Sir," Weber asked quietly, "if there are Americans nearby, what are our options?" Müller considered this question carefully, his tactical mind clearly working through various scenarios and their implications. "Our primary mission is reconnaissance and intelligence gathering, not engagement. If we encounter American forces, our responsibility is to observe their strength, equipment, and apparent mission, then report that information back to battalion. Direct confrontation should be avoided unless absolutely necessary for our own survival." Thompson found himself nodding again at Müller's tactical wisdom. The German officer clearly understood the broader strategic picture and was not allowing personal heroics or aggressive impulses to override sound military judgment. It was exactly the kind of mature, professional approach that Thompson had learned to value in his own commanders. The morning sun had now risen high enough to burn off most of the mist, and the forest around the clearing became fully visible in the clear autumn light. Thompson could see that Müller had positioned Weber to provide security coverage while continuing his own detailed examination of the area. Both German soldiers moved with the careful efficiency that spoke of extensive training and combat experience. Müller walked back to the center of the clearing and withdrew a small notebook from his jacket pocket, making detailed notes about his observations. Thompson watched as the German officer sketched a rough map of the area, marking specific terrain features and noting the locations where he had discovered evidence of recent American activity. "Weber," Müller said as he completed his notes, "I want you to understand something important about our current tactical situation. The Americans excel at what they call reconnaissance in force, which means they gather intelligence while maintaining the capability to engage targets of opportunity. If there are American soldiers in this area, they are almost certainly gathering information about our positions, our strength, and our movement patterns." Weber listened attentively to this tactical briefing, his young face showing the concentration of someone trying to absorb lessons that might keep him alive. "Sir, how do we protect ourselves against that kind of surveillance?" "The honest answer, Weber, is that we cannot completely protect ourselves against a well-trained reconnaissance team that has time to prepare positions and study our movements. What we can do is vary our patrol routes, change our schedules unpredictably, and always assume that we are being observed. The moment a soldier begins to feel completely safe is the moment when he becomes most vulnerable." Thompson felt a chill of recognition as he realized that Müller was describing the exact vulnerability that the German officer was experiencing at that very moment. The irony was almost overwhelming. Müller clearly understood the theoretical threat posed by American reconnaissance teams, yet he had no idea that he was being observed by exactly the kind of enemy soldier he had just described to Weber. Martinez's voice returned to Thompson's earpiece with unmistakable urgency. "Thompson, that patrol on the ridge is moving this way. We've got maybe 15 minutes before they reach your position. You need to complete your mission and get out of there now. Thompson felt the weight of decisions settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. His training, his orders, and the tactical situation all demanded that he complete his mission immediately. The approaching German patrol meant that his window of opportunity was closing rapidly, and any further delay would compromise not only his own safety, but the success of the entire intelligence-gathering operation. Yet, as he watched Muller carefully fold his notebook and return it to his pocket, Thompson found himself thinking about the photograph that the German officer had looked at earlier. He wondered if it showed a wife, children, or perhaps parents who were waiting for their son to return home safely. The thought created a mental image that Thompson found impossible to dismiss. Somewhere in Germany, people who had never heard of David Thompson were hoping and praying for Klaus Müller's survival. Müller began walking toward the edge of the clearing, his mission apparently complete. Weber fell into step beside him, maintaining proper tactical spacing while keeping his rifle at the ready. Both German soldiers moved with the calm professionalism that Thompson had come to associate with experienced troops, regardless of which uniform they wore. "Weber," Müller said as they reached the tree line, "I want you to remember this patrol when you have soldiers under your own command someday. Real reconnaissance is not about finding the enemy and engaging them immediately. Real reconnaissance is about gathering information that will help your superiors make informed decisions about larger tactical and strategic questions. Sometimes the most valuable intelligence comes from observing what is not present rather than what is visible." Thompson realized that Muller had just articulated something that his own training officers had tried to teach him during sniper school. The most successful reconnaissance missions were often those where no shots were fired, no contact was made, and no immediate action was taken. The value lay in the intelligence gathered rather than in the targets engaged. As Müller and Weber disappeared into the forest, Thompson finally understood why he had been unable to complete his mission. The German officer represented something more complex than a simple military target. He embodied the same professional competence, the same dedication to duty, and the same fundamental humanity that Thompson recognized in his own unit's leadership. To have acted against Müller would have felt like a betrayal of everything that Thompson valued in his fellow soldiers, regardless of which side they served. Martinez appeared at Thompson's position just minutes after the German soldiers had departed, his expression showing a mixture of concern and confusion. "Thompson, what happened out there? You had multiple opportunities for a clean engagement, and intelligence reported that you failed to complete your mission." Thompson considered his response carefully, knowing that his explanation would have to satisfy military regulations while remaining true to his own moral understanding of what had occurred. The target was clearly identified and observed for an extended period, but tactical circumstances prevented engagement without compromising our intelligence-gathering mission. The enemy officer demonstrated advanced tactical awareness and appeared to be conducting his own reconnaissance activities that provided valuable intelligence about German patrol procedures and capability. Martinez studied Thompson's face for several moments before nodding slowly. Sometimes the intelligence value of observation exceeds the tactical value of immediate engagement. "Did you learn anything useful about enemy capabilities?" "Yes," Thompson replied truthfully. "Their reconnaissance techniques are more sophisticated than our briefings suggested, and their officers show a clear understanding of our own methods. They're adapting their procedures based on direct observation of our tactics." As they prepared to evacuate their position and rejoin the rest of their squad, Thompson found himself reflecting on the strange encounter that had just concluded. In the space of a few hours, he had gained a deeper understanding of the professional soldiers who wore different uniforms, but faced many of the same challenges, dangers, and moral complexities that defined his own military experience. The intelligence that Thompson and Martinez gathered during their observation would prove valuable to American commanders planning future operations in the region. Their detailed notes about German patrol procedures, equipment, and tactical awareness would help other American units avoid detection and complete their own missions more effectively. But perhaps more importantly, Thompson had gained a personal understanding of the humanity that existed on both sides of the conflict, an understanding that would influence his approach to future missions in ways that military training manuals could never adequately address. 3 weeks later, Thompson learned through intelligence reports that Mueller's unit had been transferred to another sector, where the German officer continued to serve with the same professional competence that Thompson had observed during their brief, unacknowledged encounter. The war continued to rage across Europe, bringing countless other confrontations between soldiers who might have recognized something of themselves in their opponents if circumstances had allowed for the kind of extended observation that Thompson had experienced. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.